Welcome to Leadership Trademarked, the podcast where we explore what it truly means to lead in today's uncertain world. Built on decades of experience across industries, we go beyond theory to examine the real tools, challenges, and outcomes that define leadership today. In Season 1, we laid the foundation, bringing together voices from across sectors to uncover the core principles of effective leadership. Now in Season 2, we turn our attention to the existential challenges organizations face: uncertainty, rapid technology changes, and shifting generational expectations. We kick off the season with founding members Leslie Riley and Rosalind Kingsmill, sharing over 80 years of senior leadership experience, and myself, Sylvia Fraser, a leader driving inclusion and innovation in municipal government and public service. Supporting us behind the scenes is Finley Gain, whose tech expertise ensures our conversations reach you smoothly and professionally. So join us as we unpack real-world leadership with insight, purpose, and actionable strategies, helping you define and refine your own leadership trademark.
In this episode, we talk with Shelly Anne Penner on the topic of identity, using a tool called the Identity Matrix to do a deeper inquiry into who we are. I'll pass it over to Roz to set the scene.
The Identity Matrix are big words for know thyself, honor thyself, and trust thyself. So we all know that we go into jobs and organizations making the best choice we can. And then in the first 6 months or so, we start to find out what's going on under the covers. And those are tricky times in the beginning of entry into a new job or a new career or a new level in the same organization. So we really have to know who we are and what we stand for. And there are 6 questions that we need to ask ourselves. It's important. It's important work. Take it seriously, keep it brief, and answer the question. And then, of course, you'll get it. And once you've got it, you get it. And now that becomes a way in which you can get into conversations with people about anything and be absolutely comfortable that you are being authentic. So it stops that interruption that we often get when we ask somebody what is an important question, and it comes back with a lot of words with no meaning. And when that happens, you know that they don't know who they are. So that's a red flag where you've got to stand back and figure out what the hell's going on here and then go back at it. So this is core work for individual leaders and managers to be armed with. And as Finn says, it's an inside game. And when you're solid on the inside, I know a lot of people that I've worked with on this have said, oh, but it's bragging. And I said, one fella, I said, really? I said, so are you lying to me? Did you do that or not? He said, well, no, I did it. I said, it's not bragging if you did it. And that changed his approach to how he presented himself. Okay. So welcome, Shelly.
Thank you for that introduction, Roz. So in our discussion about who am I, that's a very broad expression or a very broad question. So there are questions. There's 6 questions, as Roz mentioned. And the first 3 relate around to this issue of who I want to be. So the first question I have this evening is about your core. What is something that you want to be and believe you always will be?
Something I want to be and believe I always will be is a change agent, for sure. I see potential, I see opportunity, and I just have this innate drive to just want to go there. And so if I see something that I feel is worthwhile, my inner self just goes for it. So I guess, yeah, my answer to that would be the change agent.
Good. That's great. So moving on from your change agent core, we're going to look at your potential. What is something you want to be and believe you could become?
Well, I always want to be the person that makes a difference in, my past, my present, my future. I want to be somebody who, whether it's an interaction at a grocery store with a complete stranger standing, picking, deciding whether or not it was safe to buy green bananas, and I smile at them, I want to make a difference in their day just by smiling and acknowledging that, yeah, you're here and I'm here and we're both looking at green bananas and we may have completely different thoughts on green bananas, but the acknowledgement that, it's just being there, and that smile could have changed that person's day.
Well, Shelly, that's a beautiful statement. And I know you well enough that you do that. So it is your potential, and I have seen you do it. But just under the waterline, is that really hard to do, or is it quite natural?
To be the person that makes a difference?
Yeah.
I think it comes pretty naturally to me. I was raised by, I don't even know if my parents recognize that they are those people. But it's definitely, if I'm comparing something that, myself and the way that I am out in the world, it's, I don't have to, I don't have to necessarily work at it. It does come naturally. It may cost me some emotional energy at times, but it does come fairly naturally.
Well, as
it's not comfortable, try it again.
As I've known you, Shelly, you don't fake it. You are always authentic.
No.
In some interactions, you say less or you listen more, but I don't ever see you pretending. I don't think you know how to pretend.
About me not being able to pretend?
You're not a pretender. You can
that
cope.
Could be a downfall as well.
Yeah, you can cope, but you don't pretend. Okay, thank you. Sorry, Leslie, go ahead.
No, that's good. What is something you want to be? Sorry, let me start again. What is something you want to be but believe you may never be? So this would be in terms of do you see a limit or a limitation in terms of what you want to be and what you want to do?
So it's interesting. This kind of it came to light not all that long ago. I've always wanted to, like, in the world of healthcare and whatnot, I'm an operating room nurse, and I love my job and I love what I have the opportunity to be part of, but I've always wanted to be a primary healthcare provider. And as I get older and I recognize that my work in the operating room, it's important, it is rewarding. I feel like I'm limited by the nature of the work. I love people. I absolutely love people. I want to be with people. I want to be around people. I want to hear about their physical, their mental, their emotional, their social. I'd love to have the opportunity to be able to care for patients and people in a greater sense. That being said, I entertained going back to school about a year ago. I was offered admission into the nurse practitioner program, and I came to accept that I'm going to say this. I came to accept that being able to go back to school, I could, but it probably isn't the smartest thing for me to do at this stage in my life. If I could turn the clock back 10 years, I would definitely do it. But I've come to realize that I'm 45 years old, which I realize is not old, but I am a single mother with 2 children, and I could spend the next 3 years doing a master's and become a nurse practitioner and come out of it with 3 years of lost wages, 3 years of tuition to pay back. But I realized that my children also need to go to university. And it was my first experience in life ever where I've had to say, it was, I guess, it reminded me of my own mortality, which might sound morbid, but it reminded me that my role is to take care of my children and to allow them to move through their futures with less challenges, less hiccups, less financial burden. So it didn't make sense to me, but it reminded me of my mortality, because it's not my answer wasn't a maybe later. It was a no, I think that ship has sailed. And that's, and I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it. But it was the first time in my life that it wasn't a maybe later. It was a no, this just isn't going to happen during my time on this earth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is competing priorities more for women than men, because these kids, they don't pop out and get out of diapers and they're done. They need a lot of parenting until they get to university. And so we have to choose. I myself had to make that kind of a choice. It was a fabulous job. I know I could have done it. It was going to pay me lots of money. I was really wanted, but I was going to be on airplanes all the time. And I had a kid, and he was an only child, and I was a single mother, and I didn't want him spending that much time at his dad's. And I had to pick one over the other.
Yeah.
Secretly, when I'm really pissed off at him, I think, you little bastard, I gave up my career for you. But honestly, the job of taking a baby from womb to their early phases, it's the hardest leadership job in the world.
But yet the most rewarding.
Yeah, it is. Except when it isn't. Okay, Leslie, back to you.
Thanks for telling us that story, Shelly. I really appreciate your honesty. And I think it's a perfect example of how knowing who you are and being able to answer that question of who am I? You're a professional, you're in the OR, you wanted to do something else, but you're also first line mom and parent.
Yeah.
And by knowing that, you were able to make a really difficult decision and be satisfied with the outcome of that decision.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
I know I made that decision for the right reason.
Exactly. So now we're going into those things that you don't want to be. This one is we think of as the boundary. So what is something you do not want to be and believe that you never will be? You don't want to and you won't be.
I don't ever want to be a pessimist. I want to always be able to see the good in things. I mean, I'm not going to walk around with rose-colored glasses on. I am realistic. However, I don't want to be a naysayer. I don't want to be a pessimist. I also don't ever want to lose hope, and I never want to stop growing. Never want to stop growing as a mom, a nurse, a sister, a partner, a daughter, a friend. Like, I believe every relationship is reciprocal, and whether, again, back to the complete stranger that maybe handing me my coffee at the drive-through, I make eye contact and I say thank you, and they in return say you're welcome, and it's an exchange. It's that very short relationship. It's reciprocated. So I don't want to lose the ability to keep growing in all aspects.
Great. Thank you. You reminded me of these interactions that you have today. I was ordering lunch and they only had two kinds of bubbly in the counter behind. And I bonded with the cashier over our love of bubbly and our fear that we wouldn't be able to get it in the next 6 months if the tariffs get too high.
Well,
We left friends because this bonded us.
Yeah, you have conversations with people that could lead to one of my absolute best friends now, she is like a sister to me. We were standing waiting at the we have an annual ski exchange here, and so the lineup was, well, we'd been in line for 2 hours. And we got to the front of the line after chatting and talking for 2 hours. And he says, "Okay, ladies, it's your turn." And we looked at each other and we said, "Well, we're not ready yet." And he's like, "Well, what do you mean you're not ready?" So we chuckled and we went in and we walked around together and we exchanged phone numbers. And our
nice.
children have become good friends. Her husband and my partner, Mike, have become good friends. We travel together and she is my confidant. She's my go-to.
Yeah.
And we met in a lineup at a ski exchange. Bonds can be made anywhere.
Yes, they can. What is something you do not want to be, but afraid you could become? Now, this is the defect or the weakness. So, what is it that you don't want to be, but afraid you could become?
I guess I have a fairly positive outlook on life, but I am terrified of becoming, and it very well could be, the target of negativity, of insecurity, that because some you see people who have insecurities, who are negative, who can't seem to see that silver lining, and they have a target, and I don't want to be that target.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if somebody ever targets you, give me a call and I'll come up and take them out.
Well, I've been targeted, and it was a long, hard battle, but
Yeah.
it was something that it helps build resilience, and it helps you become a stronger character. I think it's an exercise in self-development and self-awareness to just how much can you handle,
Yeah.
and how are you going
Yeah,
to come out of it.
right. Did you learn some clues as to maybe what are the signs that you're getting sucked into something like that?
For me, I was losing my love for this. It was happening at work, and I was losing my love for something that I genuinely enjoyed. I loved going to work. People would ask me, "How are you today?" And I'm like, "Good. I'm happy to be here." And look at me like I have a third eye. I was like, "No, I really am happy to be here." And I remember walking through the parking lot at work and developing just tears in my eyes and seeing this person's vehicle in the parking lot and thinking,
Uh-huh.
I just don't want to go.
Right.
So that's when I knew I had to do something.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have been a target, but lucky for me, I was able to articulate what that meant and the impact that it had. And I think it also had been affecting some of my colleagues that were empowered to come forward.
Mm-hmm. And allowed you to make a plan to change, I suppose, too.
Yeah.
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 What is something you do not want to be, but believe you always will be? Let me say that again. What is something you do not want to be, but believe you always will be? So this would be your shadow.
Well, I think in my character, I'm probably hypersensitive, overly empathetic, right? I tend to I feel people's emotions, and it's overwhelming at times, right? So learning how to compartmentalize that, learning how to set clear boundaries that are there to protect myself and to protect my loved ones, and even to protect everybody around me. Just, yeah, I am hypersensitive. I wear my heart on my sleeve, and maybe sometimes I overthink it and overfeel it. It's a work in progress.
Can you talk a little bit more about how having a clear understanding of who you are as a person and what you want to be helped you navigate a major change in your life or a major challenge in your life?
I think we all have our core values, right? My father is the epitome of resilience.
He certainly
He
is.
Yeah, my father has been through more than most of us could even shake a stick at, and he is by far the most positive person I know. He has a million and one things to complain about, but you'll never hear him complain about anything. So I think that my mom raised us, my sister and I, from those same core values. My parents together have been through a lot, and apart have been through a lot. So I think that what it boils down to is who we are at our core. I think our true selves will always surface in times of stress, of uncertainty. So if you can decide who you are and identify who you are at your core, it'll shine through.
It sounds to me like what you were describing as in terms of your core strengths, the change agent with the potential to see the future, wanting to make a difference, and who you are, who your contribution is in general, your role as a primary nurse and as a mom and as a friend and a daughter has led you to have this same kind of resilience that you saw in your father.
I hope so. I hope so. We don't always see things in ourselves the way we can see them in others, but he's he's my idol, and my dad is my go-to for strength, for resilience, for even just nice comfortable silence.
That's
And
great.
a hug.
Yeah. Yeah, dads are good for that. So I think that at this stage, Finn wanted to ask a question about if I'm a listener.
If I'm a listener and I'm saying, I know I have core values, but I can't quite pin what they are, or I know they drive my behaviors, but I can't quite articulate them, what recommendations might you give, or what tools have you used in the past, if any, other than this identity matrix, to better understand how to lead from your core values, identifying them and then using them?
I guess my core values, had you asked me this 25 years ago, I probably would have had a hard time articulating what I've been able to come to at 45 years old. But trials and tribulations will, if you take a moment to really reflect on what it is that's going on around you. I do a lot of journaling, known to get up at some ungodly hour with my, when I say ungodly, I'm talking 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning, and just grab a coffee and sit down with my journal and just write things down, and then I reread that in the future, and it brings you back to where you were at a really good place in your life, a not so good place in your life, sometimes a really horrible place in your life, and it's food for thought and reflection, insight. You might not see it in the moment, but vision's 2020 in retrospect if you take a moment to think about it.
So while it may be difficult for the listeners who are saying, I can't quite pin my core values, to identify them in the moment, you can use a process like this, like sitting down with a journal, maybe it's your computer, and reflecting back on trials and tribulations that you've gone through, because everybody's gone through different versions of trials or tribulations. What should they be looking for? Is it a common pattern, a common thread that they find through these different trials, and that's what speaks out as like, this is core?
I think it's who you always come back to be, right? Are you able to say, yes, I did make that decision for the right reasons? Do I have integrity? Would I make the same decisions? Would I make the same choices if nobody was looking, right? So those things like that will bring you to your core values. There's a lot of language around identifying it, and I've read many self-help books. I used to like to grab a coffee and just go sit in that section in chapters for hours on end. Life doesn't allow that anymore, but yeah, just a lot of reading, a lot of trying to find the words to describe the feelings that we have.
Shelly, when you say that, I'm aware that we live in a society, particularly right now, where people try to express themselves from facts about a situation. Well, the fact was this, or the fact is that, or as a matter of fact. And I cannot see that underneath that is a bunch of feelings, but they're more often than not expressed, or they're left out. I think a lot of engaging with people is to recognize that you can't really engage with somebody who doesn't express how they feel. And it doesn't have to be a great big long unpacked psychiatric thing, but a genuine sense of, whether what you're saying or what they're experiencing makes them, mad, sad, glad, or scared. And I think for me anyway, and something that I do with with all my clients is that I pull them towards expressing those feelings because they are bottled up inside. It's not like they don't exist. But if they're not articulated in a relationship, the relationship is not as attached as it could be. It becomes detached.
Definitely. And if, you can, we've spoken of authenticity, and if you don't bring your true authentic self, it'll show itself. And nobody, I don't know, but if somebody isn't being genuine, then whether maybe it's a fear of being vulnerable or whatnot, but it's not that you're not speaking to the true person.
Then I'm sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
I was just going to say one more thing about the core, because sometimes over life we think that this person has changed a lot in one direction or another, or maybe we've changed. And I suspect that it's less to do with a change in our core and more having to do with how we interpret or how we experience it, or maybe things that we let get in the way or interfere with that set of core principles that really feel right. And I think that might be one of the advantages or one of the value of journaling, is just being able to look back over time at how some of those changes affected the way you saw yourself and others and with others.
And I mean, I think when I say our core values they're true, they're genuine, they're who we are and how we become who we are. But it's not to say that we necessarily change as life goes on, but we grow. Life throws us curveballs. We have life experiences that may alter the way we see things, the way we react to things. There may be unhealed wounds that keep a lot of people from being able to be authentic and from being able to be vulnerable and show their selves, because they're just not ready yet.
I agree. I think that's important. And we're human. We also make mistakes, and we look back on something and say, yeah, that wasn't really me. I mean, you hear that a lot, is this who I've become, or is
Yep.
this who we've become, this isn't who we are.
Also being able to acknowledge that if you have made a mistake, or even if you're questioning whether or not you've made a mistake, having the ability to recognize that and explore it's huge.
And Shelly, as you're talking, I can see Finley's brain going at about 400 miles an hour. So why don't we let him come back in? Something going on in that brain. I can see it.
You're very on point, Roz, because I wanted to ask a question that relates so deeply to my lived experience, which is someone who feels a lot, thinks a lot, and because of all the feeling and because of all the thinking, I need to do a lot of reflection to unpack what I'm feeling and to unpack what I'm thinking. And I am at the point that you were talking about, 20 years before. I'm 23, and
Yep.
I'm trying to, I suppose, articulate who I am and come to a greater sense of what my core values are. And I asked this question out of curiosity. In what ways has having a stronger understanding of your core values led to you approaching life with greater self-assuredness in knowing how you might navigate environments and different situations and knowing how you might navigate what life throws at you?
I think just being gentle. Be gentle with yourself. Know that there's always, and I hope to never, ever, ever stop growing, never stop exploring, and having the ability to, we make mistakes, we make poor choices, but you can forgive yourself for it and learn from it.
So in a way, that even if there's bumps that come
Yep.
or trials and tribulations, that you'll have learned how to be gentle, either within or after those experiences.
Yeah. And sometimes it's not right in the moment, but give yourself time and don't try to sweep it under the rug, because it'll always come back. Try to work through things and try to allow yourself to heal and use those painful experiences as opportunities for growth, opportunities to develop resilience, and again, an opportunity to get to know yourself
Thank you for your authenticity. Roz or Leslie, would you like to wrap it all together and summarize? How about Leslie?
Yeah.
Summarize what we've spoken about today.
Well, we've been talking about the value and the importance of knowing who we are. And hopefully, we've given you some ideas about how our listeners some ideas about how we can go through a process to help uncover who that true, authentic self is. And I have a final question for our guest speaker, Shelly. If you could give somebody a quick tip on how they can apply, like what's one thing they could start doing tomorrow to create this better understanding of who they are at their core, what would you advise them to do? The one thing.
I think my advice would be to, take a moment to reflect, take a moment to think about things. We're all very quick to, we've got these knee-jerk reactions, and, whether it's on a personal level, a professional level, just take a moment. And like I say to my kids, always treat others the way you want to be treated, and put yourself in the other person's shoes. And yeah, just take a moment to reflect and think about the bigger picture.
Well, thank you for that, Shelley. And thank you for taking the time this evening and being so open with your journey through this identity matrix. It can be a very revealing process, and we appreciate your willingness to come here and talk about it. I really appreciate your time and your openness and your honesty. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed the questions. I may have talked in circles a bit, but yeah.
Well, actually, the matrix is a bit of a circle. It does take you back to the beginning, so that's perfect.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode, but before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a powerful and simple invitation. Take a moment, whether it's later tonight on a quiet walk or in the margins of your journal, and sit with these 6 questions. What is something you want to be and believe you always will be? That's your core. Write it down. What is something you want to be and believe you could become? That is your potential. What is something you want to be but are not? That is your limit. What is something you do not want to be and are not? That is your boundary. What is something you do not want to be but are afraid you could become? That is your weakness. And what is something you do not want to be but believe you always will be? And that is your shadow. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it with a friend or drop us a note. We would love to hear what has surfaced for you. Until next time, we are Leadership Trademarked. Signing off.